Hello and welcome to Nodes and Biscuits yet again, a Godot game dev podcast. I'm Christoph Klestel, your host, and today I am joined by Bitbrain, a prominent figure in the Godot world who's made and maintained quality plugins, such as Beehave and Pandora, while also working on his game called Cave. Beehave allows one to design behavior trees in the editor, and Pandora is a plugin that simplifies the handling of RPG data at scale. And that's something every game developer loves. I remember when I was starting using Godot, I already noticed you on Twitter, you had your add-ons being developed, and how does it feel, Miguel, to just be one of the first people to be creating those super high quality add-ons?
It's an interesting question. I actually thought I was actually quite late to the game because I started using Godot in 2020. And this was a time where Heartbeast and DevDuck and they all had their big channels already. And I almost felt like I'm late to the party, basically, people are already like dancing on the dance floor. The food is already eaten. And I'm just like standing on the side and just doing my thing. This is how I initially felt joining Godot. But real quick, I realized there are some gaps that I basically utilized. Coming from Java, coming from having solved a lot of these problems before in a different programming language. For example, behavior trees. This was something I did at uni just for fun in Java.
And that's the plugin I remember first as well. It's called Beehave, isn't it?
Yes.
Lovely.
I didn't actually write the original version myself. This was basically done by a chap called Vinicius Gerardini, I think. But it was more of a demo project, but I used that as a template to then build out a production-ready add-on with much more features on top and new nodes and yeah.
Right. Do you have, by the way, do you have any plugins? Because, your skill at writing plugins is just, it's out there. Do you have any plugins that you haven't released but use them personally in your projects?
No, not really. The thing is, I try to avoid writing plugins because like maintaining them is quite an overhead. And after having published now two bigger add-ons, one is Beehave, the other one is Pandora, which is still in alpha, but it's still a huge overhead. So I want to avoid having like plugins separately to my code. I just like keep it as part of my game code and. Maybe in future, who knows?
What's the most time-consuming aspect of having an add-on like that? Is it the fact that you need to be catching up with new Godot versions, or is it bugs, issues?
So yeah, Godot releases are usually a bit stressful, but it took me never longer than a couple of days to upgrade all my add-ons. Usually, it's not like, oh my god, now I need to spend weeks fixing my add-on. I think the most time-consuming one is basically the community management part, where, especially with Behave, it I think has now 1,400 stars. And
oh wow!
I know that a lot of people use it, so I can't just like push to main some breaking change because I think it's a cool feature. Yeah. After a couple of hours or days, even I might receive a lot of requests of like, hey. This is broken. What did you do?
Oh no, absolutely. So, I can believe that. But also 1,000 stars, really? 1,000? That's a surreal number for an add-on. Damn.
Oh yeah. I don't know like how this happened because I don't actually really promote it. Like even like on my YouTube channel. I mean like I have like one video where I talk about behavior trees a bit of Behave, but it's not like there and I'm not like talking about it actively. So it seems like it's fulfilling a niche. But there are also some other add-ons that are quite good in this area already. And they're utilizing different concepts. So for example, Behave tries to be as Godot native as possible in terms of utilizing nodes as the structure.
I really
like
that.
While the other add-ons try to use like the graph tree or some custom tree structure, which is also useful, but I want to rely on Godot as much as possible in my add-ons.
Absolutely. I was building an add-on earlier today, and I was so tempted to use the graph node, but didn't, because it felt like I could use it, but it's just a fancy way of doing something I could do easier with nodes. What are you working on these days?
So these days, well, I'm delving a bit into C++. I'm trying to upgrade Beehave to like version 3.0, which will be a GD extension.
Oh, beautiful.
It's still in the early days, but there is a whole discussion, blog post, whatever, on GitHub if you want to like know the details. But in a nutshell, it gives us more flexibility on performance and also compatibility. It would then be natively integrated into Godot rather than being scripts, and then inheritance sometimes can be a bit tricky.
I understand.
But that's early days at the moment.
Right.
And the other big thing is basically my RPG that I'm working on for like 4 years now, almost.
4 years. Oh my goodness. I listened to a podcast that you were on. I think it was with it's an English podcast. And you know, you were talking about
the Game Dev London podcast,
yes,
possibly.
That's probably the one. And I remember you talking about the name of the game. What's the name of the game?
I'm still not 100% there. I already have, I think, a few candidates for it.
All right.
But
I
might make not yet.
No,
not
yet.
Right. I'm just a bit worried, especially in today's times, someone might take that name for their game, because these are really good candidates, and I don't want someone else to take that idea.
What's your, I'm going through the process of picking a name for the game project I'm working on now as well. What's your process of finding a name, picking a name, making sure that that name will be good for that game? I think this is going to be super interesting to anyone trying to name their game.
So usually what I try to do initially when I start like any project, especially like during game jams or for add-ons, I just come up with like some like project name basically to take off the pressure, right? So for example, for my RPG, I was building a cave game, so it made sense to call it Cave. It's okay, Cave. That's it, Obviously, after some time, I realized, while Cave is like a name everyone knows in terms of like when they watch my videos, like when you look on like world population scale, if you like type in Cave on Google, it's literally the worst name ever, and nobody will ever find my game. And also it doesn't really fit what the game is about, because it's actually not about a cave, it's about dwarves in a mountain. So in terms of like finding a name, try to think of like a single sentence. Like first, like try to think, okay, what is actually the game about? Like not even gameplay mechanics, but what is like the core thought behind your game? And from this sentence, you can then come up with a list of names that resemble that sentence.
I actually have an interesting thing that I've noticed in the past 1 week, where I've been doing a lot of research into other games' names as well. And I noticed that some people go with making a name that is more closely linked with the mechanics. And other people go with a name that's more closely linked with the story or the world or the player fantasy. What's your take on this? Do you think that specific games are better to go with the mechanical one? How do you view this?
I think it depends like what kind of game you play, right? So for example, a good example is any Mario game, right?
Okay.
The Mario is part of every Mario game, so it makes sense to have Mario as part of the name, right? And then Mario something else. Zelda, same example. Basically, in every Zelda game, you need to like save Zelda in some shape or form. Sometimes more literal, sometimes more abstract. And I think it's about like the premise of the game. So if your game is very mechanic heavy or focuses all the time around one particular thing, it makes sense to call it like this, right? So for example, if my game was playing in a cave, it's about cave exploration all the time, but that's what the game is about, and this is the only mechanic. Cave would be a good name, but
Yeah, explore the cave.
my game, but this is not what my game focus is about. My game's focus is about meeting dwarves who are traumatized.
Wow.
Wow. Trying to figure out, okay, what happened here. A bit like Dark Souls, when you go into the world of Dark Souls, and everyone is a bit like, I don't want to use swear words, but everyone is a bit roughed up, and and you're like, what happened here? Like, this is very depressing, but you're still like curious. Why are people so miserable? Right?
Absolutely.
And I want to do something similar in my game, but a bit more, a bit less brutal. It will be a bit more mild. Yeah.
I gotcha. So in your game, as you get there, as you get to the world, you'll be like, what is this? But and through that curiosity, you progress further.
And just to answer your question, so I think for those games, the focus on the title should be more about that, for example, Dark Souls is not called Sword Fighter or,
difficult sword
Knight
fighter.
Knight Axe or something, or like, although you do these things as a mechanic, but it's much more than that. And
Yeah, I've noticed this as well, as in when the name of the game is more about either the world or the story, or it can be, like I said, the player fantasy, it feels a little more immersive. It feels a little more that you read it and you start thinking about the game already. Now, an interesting example I find is, for example, Vampire Survivors, right? Before Vampire Survivors came out, calling your name something Survivors could actually be a legit name. It could have, if you had a game where there were survivors or you were surviving something. But nowadays, it's such a strong word in games that there's no way anyone's not going to relate you with Vampire Survivors anymore. It completely changed the landscape. Just that one game.
Also, I find like Vampire Survivors is such a genius word because there are no survivors. You cannot survive. You can literally not survive in this game.
You're right.
The game is built in a way that you cannot survive.
Right.
Eventually, the end will come for you. But I think the title has a sense of hope and a sense of, if you just play long enough, you might survive. You might reach that point where you don't have to lose your character. And I think this is like a genius name.
And then it crashes that. I never noticed this, but you're right, because in Vampire Survivors, theoretically, every run you go on to, you're the last survivor and there are vampires around you, right? But you never survive, like you said. That's wild and genius. Yeah. And the fact that that person, the one who made it, started a whole new genre is... It's quite amazing to see it happen right in front of your eyes. I remember when I was noticing this, and I just thought to myself, something big is happening in my lifetime.
Yes.
And it's Vampire Survivors.
It's the same with the Souls-like hashtag on Steam, right? Where when you go to like Dark Souls, it has the hashtag Souls-like, and it's like, of course they put it there because they invented literally this name.
Oh yeah. Oh, and talking about names, there's boomer shooters, right? Boomer shooter was just a term coined by one person in online communication, I believe. Because he thought, this is a shooter that could be for boomers. And, sort of like, that sounds good. But now it's a tag on Steam as well. And people search for boomer shooters. They really like them. Right. Oh, yeah. Just to go back. So your process is more along the lines of trying to put your game into a sentence where you talk about what the game is like, where, in a short sentence, I imagine, and then trying to put that into a name. Right. How many iterations have you gone through already with the names for Cave?
I think like 3 major ones. I think the first iteration was, I'm just going to call it Cave. I just have to find like a way to market it.
Okay.
But this game is 90% dwarves, basically. Dwarven culture, dwarven history. dwarven intrigue, and also the concepts of like greed versus hope, and all these like attributes that dwarves have compared to humans. Because I'm trying to lean into the attributes that Tolkien puts out for dwarves, which is they can be very greedy but also heroic, but they are less corruptible than humans. But when a dwarf gets corrupted, then it's really bad.
Right. Very stubborn, right? It's the stubbornness. It's that changing the direction of a stubborn person is super slow, super difficult.
Yeah. And this is, and it's quite fun to work with these characters. I already built quite an extensive world on the side. I'm basically building the game a bit by just creating the stuff you see in the devlogs, but actually most of the work is done on the side, where I actually build the world, build the characters, give each character some lore, have like events in the world that happened, a bit like how George R. Martin actually approached Song of Ice and Fire. I tried to like copy his approach to this.
Oh, interesting. Have you, because, clearly the element of dwarves is super important here. It's super big. It's really about that. How did that come about? Have you always wanted to make a game about dwarves? How did this happen?
It's a good question. I'm a huge fan of dwarves generally, since I watched Lord of the Rings. But before I watched Lord of the Rings, the reason why I became a fan of dwarves was actually not just watch the movie and I found Gimli amazing, but to me it's much more because I love the mountains. I'm a huge fan of nature, and other people like the big city. Ironically, I currently live in London, but my heart is where nature is. And as a kid, I would spend a lot of time often in the mountains, in the Pyrenees, for example. And
it's beautiful.
Whenever I look at like a granite wall and like see like how majestic a mountain is, that paired with the concept of like in the world of dwarves, they actually live there and this is their home. I find this a very interesting concept because it's not the standard fantasy village, like a kingdom in a forest sort of thing, but it comes with its own set of challenges to design a world like that.
Oh, absolutely. But like you say, it's a very powerful fantasy, isn't it? Just like you, well, I didn't spend a lot of time in the mountains per se, but when I was growing up, there was a hilly area to the north of the place, and I and my classmates and friends would often run into the forest and just do stuff, right? Just running around, rolling on the floor, pushing one another from a hill and just seeing how they rolled down. It was those sorts of wild things. And I feel that the nature provides a lot of concepts that we inherently understand on a deeper level, on this powerful level where this fantasy becomes very strong, very strong.
Especially like survival games or survival mechanics are so popular, especially because people reconnect with nature through gaming rather than going outside.
Very interesting point of view. I love it. I absolutely love that. Yeah. Also, one of the best feelings is when you survive, right? And surviving in the nature, when you, for example, start with nothing, is perhaps the ultimate challenge, right? If you can do that, you will be safe. That's so. I never linked that up with the animal instinct to survive and the love for survival games. That's very interesting, but must be very powerful. I can see the correlation in there. How long have you been working on Cave, by the way?
So obviously I started working on it in 2020. This does not mean I'm working like 4 years full time on a game, because effectively I'm spending like 5 to 10% of my free time on that. Even like to my free time available, I have other things to do. I have a partner, I have a cat, I have other hobbies as well, like Magic the Gathering and D&D. And I'm also a musician and my YouTube channel. So there are a lot of other things, but the game itself, I would say like total dev time, maybe like 4 months. Like if I was like to work full time on it,
Right.
3 to 4 months.
Right. And do you plan, or would you like to change that? Would you like to be working on the game more, or are you happy with how it's going at the moment?
So if there was a magic wand that would give me infinite money, so I don't have to like worry about like paying my bills, I would totally go full time on it.
Right.
No questions asked.
Okay.
But yeah, this is not a world we live in. Otherwise, all the artists would just go full time, right?
No, yeah.
And why would I need to get the magic wand, but all the other artists who also want that shouldn't? So,
well, because you're lucky, right? Luck is such an important aspect of life, I find. But yeah. Regardless, it's rarely the case that you just get infinite money to be able to do what you want. That's true. And also,
but I would love to just work on the game every day. That would be my dream.
By the way, if you did have that infinite money, how much of that time would you spend on the game versus the add-ons?
So I would probably spend a bit more time on the add-ons. But, well, the main focus would be the game. The idea with the add-ons generally is that I didn't decide randomly to build add-ons, but the add-ons was an outcome because they had to fill a need from working on my game. So I think if I were to work more on my game, I would also work more on the add-ons because I might need more features from the add-ons that I'm lacking for my game. So
yeah. What was the main design issue or the lacking feature due to which you started building Pandora?
Ooh, that's a very good question. So one of the main problems I had was organization of resources at scale. So this, for example, means I have, let's say, 50 items of a particular type, and I want to move some stuff around. What I was dealing with, especially in Godot 3, was that sometimes the things would just reset. So sometimes in the resource files, in the trace files, some of the attributes would reset to the new file, and I had to then use git to revert. And another problem was save games, where I realized, I want to have like compatibility, right? Where when you save a resource file, right, and you can do that, right, as part of a save game and save your state in there. If you then want to upgrade the file somehow and track its individual state, you need to like duplicate the resource, so it's like independent of its so it's like standalone, so to speak.
Oh, okay.
And if you duplicate a resource, it disconnects from its original source. So any changes into the original resource will not be inherited down anymore. And all these things are basically solved by designing Pandora.
That is awesome. Could you go through the design of Pandora a little bit? Because one of the features that I often found lacking was, just like you said, handling of data at scale. So let's say that I've got 25 enemies. Each enemy has an attack. Those attacks are defined by resources. And, we always build a custom database. For example, once we built a Notion database and we built tooling that imported information from Notion. How specifically is this solved by Pandora?
So you mentioned database there, right? It's effectively a database. Specifically, I didn't come up with this idea of Pandora like out of nothing, but I actually tried out GridlessDB. I don't know if you're aware of GridlessDB. I've seen it, yeah. It's a very powerful tool that allows you to do basically what Pandora can do, but much more. But the problem was I couldn't really use it with Godot 4 because it has a Godot export, but what it would do is it would just render or like output resource files. And then those resource files, first of all, were incompatible with Godot 4 because they were Godot 3 resource files, but also they were resource files. So I would inherit the same problems. So with Pandora, I basically try to copy paste what GridlessDB does, but tailor it more towards Godot. And the way how it does that basically is you have a tree structure similar to folders and files. You have these things called categories and entities. And the power of Pandora comes from when you can define properties on categories, and then any children will automatically inherit down everything the parent defines.
Beautiful. Gotcha.
Yeah. And then you can have references between, you can, for example, have another category as a reference, and you can do some smart things as well.
That sounds really good.
Yeah.
That sounds really good. Talking about gridless DB, I was reminded of one other tool that I tried using called Castle DB. Have you heard of Castle DB? No?
Never heard of it.
It looks like a table database, a spreadsheet, but exports to a JSON. But it's very straightforward. I was just curious whether you had tried it as well. So with Pandora, we're looking at a tree-like structure, inheritance of properties, and you can also reference other not structures. What was the name that you mentioned?
Well, you can reference entities or categories.
Entities or categories. Nice.
Yeah.
And I imagine that you've already tested Pandora on your project. How is that going?
Yes. I'm using it in the game basically, and it just works. It not just works. A little Todd Howard joke here. Obviously, it took roughly 6 months of focusing a lot of my free time on it, and not working on Cave, but rather working on it. And also a big shout out to Nathan Hort here. Nathan, I hope I pronounce your last name properly, but Nathan, he is also a YouTuber, and he is the author of the Dialogue Manager add-on. That's
the one I'm using, and it's great. It's a fantastic
I'm using
add-on.
it too.
Oh, awesome.
And he helped me a lot with feedback. Especially in the early iterations of the game, we would jump on a call, and I would screen share and show my results. He would give feedback. I would say it was instrumental to the design of Pandora, because otherwise it would have been wouldn't have been as mature as it is now.
Gotcha. That's super important, isn't it? It's also in games, but also in tools. Getting good quality feedback that, from my perspective, it also depends. Sometimes it's better to have a real player feedback. Sometimes it's really good to have a designer feedback. But I completely understand that.
Just also real quick to mention, there is an emotional aspect to it as well.
Oh,
because
do tell.
When you come up with an idea, or you have your baby project, I would say it's very difficult to willingly go to someone where they will probably tell you that what you did is not good enough or is wrong, right? And this is you need to basically accept whatever you created that is your baby. Probably you have to throw it all away again.
This is one of the most difficult aspects of creating anything, which is you always attach it to yourself. Sort of, it's we all know about it consciously, right? But the logic is there, but it's really difficult to put in practice, where someone says, your game's shit, right? If someone says this, anyone can say it, and it could objectively be the case, but it's really important that we manage to disassociate that from, feedback onto yourself. But it's super hard.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yep.
I basically just reached out to him because my thinking was, okay, if my bet is wrong, and basically what I'm building here is not really right, it will be just a huge pain. So I just went through it and approached Nathan.
Yeah, Marable, really, that's brilliant. I can't imagine a better way of building something of quality than by getting quality feedback, and most of all, being ready to accept not being right all the time, right?
Oh, it's difficult.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
When I stream, I sometimes say this out loud. I say, guys, anyone saying anything, I'm super thankful, because me streaming in front of people means that I can assume that I am right all the time. I can do this easily, but it's not what I want to do. which is why I'm super thankful to anyone looking at the project through a fresh set of eyes. Just throwing random ideas out there, seeing what sticks. And it gives me the opportunity to remove the ego from the equation and try to look at something fresh without really wanting myself to be right. So yeah.
Yeah, I get that.
Now, so we've got the game, we've got the add-ons, and we come over to Godot editor itself. You mentioned you started using it in 2020, right?
So
you started using the editor in 2020, right?
Yes.
Right.
Godot 3.2, I think.
That was a good version, actually. That was I think 3.2 was the first really good version of Godot 3. I started using Godot in 2018. That was 3.0 alpha. And at the same time, not only was I on the bleeding edge of software, but it was also me for the first time trying to, or rather getting into game development more seriously. Fun times. But yeah, so Godot 3.2, what made you pick the engine?
So I actually never liked game engines. My first programming language was C++, so I always felt home in the terminal. I always felt like less is more, less UI, more automation, more low-level stuff. And I remember when I started my game dev journey, I actually built like some games with C++ and SDL.
That's
I don't know, some
incredible.
people out there might know SDL still.
I've heard of SDL multiple
SDL.
times as well. Damn. Wow.
Yeah. Good old times where I would actually create a new resource, a new texture in a while loop, and then wondering where my program crashes and why my memory goes. Yeah, good old times. But yeah, I never was really fond of game engines, and I remember it was around, when was it, 2009 or 2010, where I thought, hey, let's just try something like Unity or some game engine, basically. I tried Ogre 3D, I tried Unity, but especially with Unity, I felt at that time, there was a lot of, like the UI was very opinionated. There were a lot of things where the program basically told me, click here, you need to click here, you need to drag this, drag that. So I basically, at that time, was like quite, no, I don't need all of that. Let's just write games in Java by using libgdx.
All right.
And
okay.
I don't know, like I did this for a long time, around like, how many years did I do this? Almost 10 years I did Java game dev.
Wow. But
yes.
Java. Oh, I have a super interesting question from my perspective anyway. JMonkey Engine. Have you heard of this one?
I've heard of it. I've never used it.
You've heard of it. Okay. Yeah, because when I was getting into game engines overall, I found JMonkey Engine. And, I am on the other spectrum of effort. I was always looking for the least amount of effort that can bring me the highest quality result without sacrificing useful knowledge that I need to pick up, right? So if something was holding my hand far too much, I didn't like it. If there was something where I needed to know too much low-level stuff, I also didn't like it. And JMonkey was a little bit like that, right?
But I think it's interesting where it like clicked in my brain. Because the more you don't use game engines, the more you actually need to rely on building everything yourself.
Right.
And I was actually thinking about starting a YouTube channel.
Nice.
In 2020, because obviously COVID came and
fun times. We all remember them.
Yeah, so I don't know. Like in my head, I was at that time I was working on a game called Scape, which is basically you play a little virus computer program, and you basically have to like it with a one tap finger mechanic navigate through a level. Everything looks a bit like Tron Legacy. I got inspired by it by watching Mr. Robots and hacking and awesome. Yeah. Anyways, that was written in Java, and I don't know. I was like, I should maybe make a YouTube video about that. And I actually started recording some stuff. But while doing so, I realized this is not really fun to talk about, especially since I had some bugs, like some glitches.
Oh no.
And it's like, oh man, do I need to now dive into how like rendering pipelines might work? And
oh wow.
And I didn't really feel that's fun to work with, right? And then I remember it was like one quiet evening, I was randomly browsing on YouTube and I saw a devlog by DevDuck. He was using it was basically his video where he was talking about his old project that was still written in, I think it was Unity, that he was still using at that time. And then the next video was Heartbeast, like a Heartbeast in the recommendations, and Heartbeast at that time was already using Godot engine,
right?
And he had the like 2D RPG series out to basically explain how to build a game in Godot. And I saw that, I was like, I want to try that. If it doesn't work, fine. I'm going to continue Java, but I just want to try that.
Gotcha. So this is how it all started.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. All right. And was it the famous love at first sight, or did it take a little bit? How did that go? Your first impressions of the editor?
I think I was initially, I think the first hour or so, I was a bit weirded out because it felt a bit like, oh, it's just like 80 megabytes. Oh, you don't even have an installer. Okay, this clearly is like just some like prototype engine that doesn't really do much, you know. But then, like in the tutorial, he was like showing all these concepts. I was like, hang on a minute, I could build like a cave game with this, you know. Especially since in another video, Heartbeast was showing tile setter. And in there, he was actually making a cave tile set.
Oh, and beautiful.
I was like, I want to use that and just build a little mining game as a little first prototype. And this came to be me documenting that was the first cave devlog, basically.
Oh, wow, that is brilliant. So, but back then already, you knew you wanted to make a game with the cave and mining. Was it from the very beginning that you knew it was going to be also centered around dwarves?
No.
Okay.
It was more of I think my initial idea was I'm just going to create like 2 to 3 videos on that thing and then move on to another idea.
Okay.
Basically have like smaller videos,
Gotcha.
which I still might do in the future, right? But the thing is, I built a lot of games in my life already, and I got burnt hard by feature creep, and I know what it means to spend like 2-3 years on a game and having to abandon it. Yeah. And with all that knowledge, I still decided to start this big project because this idea, what's the word? It's maybe hard to describe, but usually what I have with any project, that after like a couple of months after the honeymoon phase is over, you start to like get new ideas, and you're like, oh, I could also try this and do that, you know.
They're everywhere. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, and that brilliant. Ooh, solve so many things. Yeah. But I would need an extra system. Yeah,
exactly. But with Cave, I have to think about this game every week. Like since I started this project, there wasn't a single week where I didn't think about it.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Very focused.
Because it goes down to my roots of like nature and like all these themes that I always wanted to do, even as a kid. Gotcha. I can now build onto the screen.
I think I think I misunderstood. You meant ideas as in other game ideas, right?
Oh yes,
yes. Yeah, right. I misunderstood. I thought you meant mechanics. No, right. Yeah. I know what you're saying, and I had this happen to me with the first commercial game I also released, where before then it was smaller prototypes, game jam games, and halfway through the projects, even if it was a weekend game jam, I was already thinking about ducks and about rivers and doing something there. But with that game, stayed on point. And is this the first time it happened to you now when you're building Cave?
yeah, I never had this ever. Like, because I worked on a space game before in Java during uni time. The idea was to have basically Star Citizen, but in 2D.
Okay, fairly ambitious.
Like top down, and yeah, it was very feature creepy. And the thing is, I didn't have a game engine. I had to build everything myself.
Oh God!
And
Wow.
from a technical perspective, I could already generate like an infinite universe with planets and stats and everything. But I don't know. At some point, I was like, I don't know. This is a bit boring. Let's move on to some new stuff. And I would almost feel like when you open your game project and it loads all up and you look at it and then it's like, I don't know, man. This kind of sucks. I never have this with Cave. Only when I look at the old code that I wrote 4 years ago. Yes, I got this, but not like when I open Cave. I'm always quite excited.
This is something I've never been through, where you've got code you wrote 4 years ago and it's part of the current active project. What does it truly feel like when you open up those lines of code? Well, I can't even imagine. What is it like, really?
I was like, I want to have a time machine and teach my past self how to properly build games in Godot, so I don't have to rewrite all of this stuff.
Oh wow!
Basically, past Miguel wasted a lot of time of future Miguel, and because what I basically have to do is I have to rewrite most of the systems from scratch, because they literally do not scale. Because when I wrote them, I didn't understand the node system properly, how signals work, and as a result, things are very tightly coupled. So if I want to create a lot of content, it would take me forever.
With Cave, how are you? Rather, have you ever been in a situation where you found your old code and you realized this would probably be faster to rewrite from scratch, all of it, the entire game?
Yes.
Use the assets and just rewrite everything. Has that ever happened?
I mean, yes. I do this partially at the moment. So for the past, I would say, past few months, I've been, for example, rewriting the entire UI, the way I do the UI and the title screen, for example.
Talking about UI, I think this is a fantastic topic because, so you've just gone through rewriting a lot of it. Are there any tips that you have for anyone doing UI in Godot now that, you've just been doing that? Is there anything that you would, share as a generally useful tip to keep in mind?
Yeah, I think you should use signals as much as possible, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
The signal up, call down principle. Sorry, signal up, call down principle. Yeah, is crucial, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I think, especially in Godot, utilize themes, the theme editor. It will save you so much pain. I promise. It initially is a bit like annoying because you have to take care of a dozen of UI components. You need to style them and then you need to configure them. And there's also not something like CSS that I would really love in Godot, but you basically have to do all of that. But once you do this, you can just literally drag and drop UIs together.
Yeah. I'd love to get your opinion on something. I had a conversation recently about the theme editor. Just like you say, I love the theme editor. It's a great thing. I love designing UIs in Godot, specifically because of the power of the themes. The other day, however, I was thinking, is there anything that could be added to the theme editor that would vastly improve my experience with designing UIs? And I think I came up with it, right? So, yeah. And I would love to know what you think. Okay. Right. So I use the themes a lot. I love the system. I love how they work. The one thing that I am missing, and now I can finally put it into words, is to be able to define sort of a master style box per item. And then, right, so for example, let's say that we've got a button, and that button has 5 style boxes. I want to be able to define a master style box that every other style box being put in there will inherit information from. The reason why I'm saying this is because imagine you have a style box, just a plain color style box, flat. And then you've got a button where you want to have 5 pixels from the left a margin. And then you set up 5 pixels from the left as a margin on every single style box. And they all have unique colors, so they need to be unique resources. And then later on in the game, you find out that you don't want it 5 pixels, but 10 pixels. And suddenly what you need to do is change those 5 to 10 pixels in every single style box.
Yes.
So yeah, I think this is the single one thing that I'm missing in the theme editor. What's your take on this?
I think it's a good idea. I think for this, Godot needs fundamentally an additional concept.
Interesting.
Because I think the problem is, right, the Godot aficionado would tell you, why don't you just as a parent or like a template style box, why don't you just you create a style box, you can save it as a resource, and then you can load it as a resource in, but then potentially you could have like a feature where you can override the properties from that resource file if you wanted to, right? Okay. Problem solved, right? Okay. To me though, from a UX perspective, this is not very obvious, because you need to constantly jump back and forth between like a resource file, which is which has nothing to do really with themes. And so I like the idea, but I'm wondering.
Well, okay. So from a UX perspective, I've thought about this fully. I have no idea how to implement it. But from the UX perspective, every time you go into a class in the theme editor, and you go into the style box section, there's a special first item called the master style box, where you define it, and the other style boxes look for that one to inherit whatever they can, or override if it's been changed in their version. So I think that would work. But I am intrigued by what you said there, that it needs an extra concept. Do you have any ideas for what sort of a concept Godot could use to improve theming of UI?
So I had a very controversial tweet.
I remember the CSS, wasn't it?
I actually had sorry for some people. I had to literally block you.
No, I need to know more about this. Wow, what happened? I saw the post and I thought, cool, this sounds like an interesting conversation. Then I went to bed. I wake up and I find another post which is, I'm never going to be doing this again. So what's the story here?
So, I mean, there's a difference between people replying with "I disagree," right? And what I usually do, and this is my rule on Twitter, if you basically attack me personally, I will block you. That's basically.
I think that's smart.
And people would basically attack me personally.
Because you suggested, just because you suggested CSS being or something similar.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Of course, yeah.
These people are on drugs or something weird. Anyways. Yeah.
But what I find more interesting were the people that disagreed with me, because to me, I kind of understand where they're coming from, because I think my tweet that I basically said that Godot needs CSS, right? But what I mean by that wasn't actually CSS, like the syntax.
Okay.
Like that you actually have to write CSS. What I meant actually was Godot establishing some of these concepts that CSS uses to establish hierarchies of components and behaviors.
That's basically it, isn't it? Hierarchies of the components and whatnot. Right. So wait, just so I understand this fully. My idea, what I just said, would be just a small part of what proper hierarchies, CSS style, would allow you to do. Right.
Where I want to go with my point is that what you're suggesting is almost as if in CSS or SAS, because CSS I think doesn't have it, SAS, where you basically inherit the style of another component and then override attributes. which is inheritance. But I think the true power of CSS is actually composition, where rather than having like a whole thing that describes, okay, this is a style box, you don't even need a style box. You can say, these are like some default styles, a collection of default styles. And then the style box would automatically inherit these individual fields because it knows about these fields.
I can't even imagine it.
Yeah.
How would this be done in the editor? Would it? Do you imagine that this would be written, or somehow?
Oh, and this is why CSS exists, right? Because it's very easy in CSS to do this sort of thing. And this is where I was coming from with my tweet, because I think there is there are a lot of problems that were solved in the past, many years ago. And CSS, for example, exists for a reason. There's a reason why people don't, I don't know, have a UI to compose CSS, but they actually write CSS.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah.
Because it allows for this composition.
Yeah.
And doing this in the UI is very difficult. I don't know, like...
No, there's a lot of clicking in the inspector for a lot of things and a lot of searching, I imagine. But I think the main issue with CSS, and this is coming from a person that knows nothing about CSS, is the fact that it looks intimidating. So I think there are two issues. For a person who's never touched CSS before, it looks intimidating. And the second issue is you can't even properly center text in a div. so
you can now.
Oh,
There's
okay.
Flexbox.
Finally. Okay.
It's very easy nowadays. And grid.
Oh yeah, fantastic. Yeah, no, but I really think that the first reaction why people don't like it is just because, okay, this is an assumption on my part, is that for someone who's never really properly got into CSS, it could be an intimidating thing to imagine.
Totally. And the thing is also that it is not really Godot. So
right,
I think we both know, right, what Godot is. Godot is not having some other new language that you then need to learn. But Godot is really like about these... what is a good example of what Godot is about, right? Like, for example, resources is like a typical way how Godot is. Like, it's using like files and things to compose.
Yeah.
Rather than having attributes to compose.
Yes. Yeah, and this is definitely Godot. Yeah, resources. What are objects in the editor that you interact with? They're all resources. You have nodes and you have resources, right? And that's what you're using. There are some levels of composition, of course, but yeah, it's a concept that the engine is built around, right? Yeah,
and I think like adding something that kind of works, like for example, like CSS. I don't know. I think it would be like wrong to just like put it on top. But I think there's still value in some of these underlying concepts that CSS is built on that allow you to inherit individual style attributes across various UI components. A good example is like text color, right? You want to set the text color on a button, but then setting a text color wherever you have text in a component is not always the same in Godot, because you don't have this a common concept of a text color on a thing.
Yeah, but it's all over the place. Yeah, I agree.
I think that to my knowledge, there are a couple of proposals that try to address that problem.
I actually wanted to ask. I heard that Unity got a new UI system in the past. I don't know how long ago, maybe it's been a year, half a year, where they employed something like CSS. Have you heard of this? Have you tried it? No?
No.
Yeah, so I remember an old colleague of mine told me about it, but I was never too interested in it for obvious reasons. And also because it was experimental and apparently it changed a lot and broke a lot, so I didn't really want to get into it in depth. But I think I feel that even if an idea doesn't align with philosophy, if it's a really good idea that would in general improve a lot of things, a massive amount, a heap of things, at that point it might be worth to reconsider slightly the philosophy. What do you think?
I think what what I probably want to do is create like a blog post to truly formulate what I meant by that tweet, because I think like posting like something slightly controversial. I did it a bit on purpose, right? To get people thinking, because if I just
you succeeded.
If I tweet something that people just agree with, there is no interesting conversation to be had, right? But I want the engagement for the purpose of getting people to think about new ways or better ways to build things in Godot, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And styling for sure is not an area I would say that I enjoy at the moment, and it should be enjoyable.
That's what I'm thinking as well, because just like you said, it's not exactly super fun to be going into the millions of little boxes and setting everything up again. It's happened to me multiple times that like I said, wanted to change the content margin. And then I realized that this same content margin now needs to be changed in multiple elements, and each element having 5 different style boxes. And I'm just, how do I prototype this quickly? But I would like to explore this direction a little bit more. So if we imagine that there was something like CSS, that would probably remove style boxes, wouldn't it? Because style boxes operate on a different concept. So this would mean a complete replacement of how UI is styled, right?
You could have still style boxes as a like backwards compatibility wrapper.
Okay.
That so basically you could still have all the components that you have would still utilize under the hood these concepts, but it's more that the core, basically for the user using Godot, if you were implementing the core of what CSS is built on, nothing would change if you just like map it, because it's basically just the underlying abstraction ways of abstracting styles, right? Because like CSS means cascaded style sheets. So it's literally that. It's a sheet containing styles, and it's cascaded, so you can cascade down styles.
So you just go do.
The problem is with CSS, people, for good reasons, I would say CSS has a very bad reputation. Because
But however, it has a bad reputation. But then, I talk to people who actively use it, and they go, "I love it. I love my CSS.
It's great."
People who use it love CSS, and not because it would be a dark magic sort of a circle that you need to get into, and then you just don't want to leave because you've already spent 5 years of your life learning it, but because once you get to use it, it's actually super fun. From what I hear, I have no personal experience with this.
So when I write CSS and I style components, I get the same feeling as, you got a nice idea for a nice new Godot node, and you like OpenGD script, you add your exports, you add your, this really feeling of like, but I have the same experience with styles when I write CSS. And to me, it's more about what is the most efficient way to style my components. And so far, I haven't seen any like suggestions that would like replicate that experience that I have with CSS.
Right.
And that I think there is a better way, like there is the Godot way of doing it, but I think that hasn't been
I know.
Formulated out yet.
Wait, I know. Imagine a style box, and we called style box CSS. And you can just type text in the style box, and the style box is like, right, and the entire thing is connected to one CSS file, and you can choose which part of the cascade you want to use.
There's actually a Godot plugin that allows you to style your components with CSS.
Cool.
It basically spits out theme files.
No way. Really?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's called Godot CSS, but
That's
it doesn't solve these issues that we discussed fundamentally.
Yeah, no, it doesn't, right? Because in terms of games, the one thing you really need at all times is iteration speed, right?
Yeah.
And needing to go into another tool that then spits out a theme file that you then load and then preview and then try in the game, that's not going to fly.
No,
not in games.
And this is why like just put CSS in Godot will not work.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't. I think the most interesting things are the things that are pain points. Do you have any commonly noticed pain points in the current version of Godot?
Oh, yes.
All right, let's hear them.
The thing is with Godot is that if you use it for a long time on a frequent basis, it's almost like not death by 1,000 cuts, but it's more like pain by 1,000 cuts, where there is not really something that is like a deal breaker for me. But like there are a lot of teeny tiny things where if I had more time, I would actually raise a lot of PRs and try, or like would like create like some proposals, but unfortunately I don't have time to do it. So I would say one thing for sure is that I want to be able to use all of Godot's UI just with my keyboard.
Well, UI focus, right? UI focus is a thing.
So currently, there are a couple of things where this is not possible. Where sometimes, how do I then jump to this property on the right? Like, and there are probably shortcuts for some of these things. But in terms of when you, for example, compare navigating through Godot, if you compare this to Visual Studio Code, VS Code, in VS Code, it's so nice. It's so much more cleaner in terms of how you navigate around.
Yeah.
And I think something like a command palette, like global search bar, where you just like search commands, search files, search whatever you want.
But Godot has that, doesn't it?
To some aspect, yes.
Right. But not the same capabilities that VS Code has, then, right?
Yeah. But again, it's like not something critical because most of that stuff already works. It's just a bit more hidden and this like creates a bit of friction. The other thing that always pained me with Godot 4, obviously, is the scene corruption stuff. But for everyone who isn't aware, I think Remy also said this on Twitter. This is currently being worked on actively, right? And I suspect the time Godot 4.4 comes out, perhaps even 4.3, most of these things will not be even there anymore.
I've heard of this. That 4.3 is the real target to solve most of them, vast majority. Yeah. And then if anything, if any bugs still seep through, then it's going to be 4.4, yeah.
And then, this was actually the biggest motivation to move to Godot 4.
Oh, nice. Custom resources.
For me, was by far, I would say, like custom resources and these exports. But I think the biggest pain was cyclic dependencies. That was such a pain. And I'm so happy it works. I can now just write script, like things, it just works. It's so amazing.
Incredible improvements of life, really. You know, you can wake up and breathe. But that's not a
problem anymore.
No.
But if you are still on Godot 3, it will be a problem. And I don't know, there are a couple of smaller things maybe. Like that. Maybe it's the OCD I have, but I would love to have types everywhere, but I can't because dictionaries don't have types. They're not.
I would love for dictionaries to have types. That'd be so good. So good.
It's just sometimes like everything is like strictly typed, and then I have a dictionary. Okay, here we are just guessing. Yeah. Who knows what type it is? I need to scroll up to remind myself what was the type again.
This is one thing. Yeah. And do you use an external editor or the built-in one?
I use built-in one. Built-in. I love it.
So one thing that for me comes up as a pain point fairly often is whenever in a class I change a method, it doesn't always get picked up in other scripts, in other classes that has changed. Yeah. Or, for example, I change the signature of a function and I go back to another script. You know, it's saved and everything. I save it, go to another script, and I put in the second parameter. Beforehand, there was only one. And Godot starts complaining that, whoa, what are you doing with this? So this is something that I know for a fact was better in VS Code when I was using it, even in Godot 3. I would love for these little things to be ironed out. I think that'd be fantastic.
And I think the biggest like pain point for me, especially since I'm a add-on creator, is the like lifecycle management of add-ons, where when you load an add-on, it's not necessarily clear when something is available to the add-on, and sometimes, depending on how you load stuff, you might end up with errors, especially with the .godot cache folder, if the cache is not properly initialized or something is like in the wrong order, because sometimes depending on which files you have, things get picked up in a different order. Suddenly people get errors, and then you have to have duck typing everywhere. And that's basically getting certain guarantees on add-on lifecycle management. That would be wonderful to have something like that. Like in this time, we guarantee that this will be available, for example.
That's a really, really strong point, I think. Really. Because I have used add-ons that always threw errors and didn't work the first time I opened the editor. I'd need to close the editor, run it again, and voila, it suddenly works, right? Just because it needed to load things that were not initialized on a fresh, clean run after, for example, cloning for the first time, right? So you clone the project with an add-on, and the project file says that this add-on is active. So it turns it on immediately before other things are ready. So that's a really, really good point. Are you following the new plugin management discussion that's going on?
Some of them. Yes.
Right. I know there was the discussion, not initialized, but made more interesting by Passive Star, who mentioned multiple times that having global add-ons is just a must, so that you can bring it from one project to another. They even created a little script to do that. It was quite nice with symlinks. Oh yeah, I saw the Twitter post. That is so cool. Have you tried it out? Have you tested it? No, I actually don't have a need for global add-ons at the moment. Right. Because it wasn't possible to ever have global add-ons, I actually didn't establish the workflows to have global add-ons. Right, right. And you also don't need them because you're mainly working on one project only. Yeah, probably they're quite useful. And they're probably, if there were a thing, there would be a lot of new like UX add-ons available that just improve the editor experience. Similar to VS Code. But I never really looked into it because it's not supported. Yeah. And what's your take on the project manager of Godot? The project manager when you start Godot, and there's the that little window that you see first. What do you think about it? From a like advanced user perspective, I think it's fine. Nothing like it does the job, and I never had any friction in it. Like I would say as a beginner, it can be quite confusing. Specifically around the idea that as a user, you already have an idea of sometimes what you want to do in the game. With the engine. For example, I want to build a 3D game I want to build an FPS shooter, right? A great experience I always had is with Spring. I don't know if you know Spring in Java. No. The idea is you can create your own backend service in Java, but you have this project called Spring Initializer where you go on the website initializer.spring.io. Sounds awesome. And you basically can like compose the thing you want to have. So when you create a new project, you can like search, for example, I want web, I want security, I want a database support, I want this. And it like generates the project for you with the right config. And having something like this where you could like say, you could like just search, and there are like some, let's say like plugins or almost having a project manager add-on. You know? Sort of like so that you can compose the base for your project. Basically having add-ons because we have editor plugin, right? And then we have like export plugin, but having actually like a project manager plugin that people can write as a global add-on, for example, even. Or I don't know, maybe it's even there's some marketplace, or I don't know how to do that. But if you then were to search, I don't know, FPS,
in that search box, you would have FPS template and would automatically do it for you and configure it with a button click.
Yeah. Actually, a thing that I'd like to ask regarding this as well, and we're really going off on a tangent regarding the editor, but I love it, is do you think that going in any of these directions will require to have something akin to Unity Hub, to have a project manager that isn't bound to a single version of the editor, right? Sort of like having a Godot hub, so to speak, that also manages the versions of the engine. Because when you've got global add-ons, the global add-ons would then probably need to define what version of the engine, right, they support. So having a notion of whether this is supported or not, and then being able to switch from one to the other, that might be a thing. What's your take on it?
I don't know. Using Godot for a long time now, and being also quite active in open source, and I also use Mastodon. I'm actually not a fan of like centralization, but I actually like decentralization a lot, having things decentralized.
Yeah.
And perhaps there could be a new project in future, or the way I could imagine it is rather than having like a global, like not global plugin, but like a Godot hub, and then that would then be owned by W4 Games, for example, because Godot
as a separate project. I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
But instead of having that, Godot could have something like Fediverse style, something that the community needs to do themselves. But it would integrate into Godot, and people basically have to register it themselves and say, this is like my hub that I trust, and that thing brings everything in. I don't know.
I see what you're saying. Well, one thing is for sure. Whether this happens or not, that's going to be an exciting thing to follow, really, right? Because if it goes in the direction of decentralization, it's usually a little bit harder for people to get into, from what for example, Mastodon. Mastodon is great, but anyone who is not exactly technically inclined or is a regular user of just Twitter goes onto Mastodon, I find that they get lost extremely quickly, because there's a lot of concepts that otherwise don't exist on a centralized platform.
And I think this can be also with UX, right? With good UX.
Right, yeah.
Even if it's like complicated under the hood, you can add basically layers of abstraction on top to make it much, much simpler for people.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. For example, something like what GitHub Desktop did with Git, right? I know people who never wanted to use Git and then started using GitHub Desktop. So yeah. Now, do you have a Steam page?
Not yet. No.
Not yet. Do we have an ETA on the Steam page?
Actually, my goal was to set one up this year.
Okay.
Just so people can like start wish listing things.
Absolutely. I think that'd be great.
The one like challenge is I will not publish a Steam page till the new visual. What's the word? The new visual
overhaul
strategy. Yeah, overhaul is done.
Right.
Because the game will look substantially different.
Wow.
To how it looks now.
Wait. All right.
But substantially different, I don't mean it still will be pixel art. It still will have dwarves and all that. Also, the pixel size probably will not change. It's more. It's gonna imagine basically 80s dark fantasy but pixel art.
I love it already. 80s dark fantasy. Nice. All right.
Like something like Labyrinth, the movie Labyrinth, or Dark Crystal, but then in pixel art.
Right. I think I can get behind on that. That's awesome. Okay, that's something to be looking forward to. And also, Miguel, where can people follow you?
So my main page will be on YouTube, which is youtube.com/bitbraindev, or just search Bitbrain on YouTube. I won't upload a video every week, but when I upload, I put all my heart in it. So
maximum effort, right?
Like and subscribe that one. Also on Twitter as Bitbrain, and also Mastodon as BitbrainDev. On the game dev game dev mastodon. I forgot the URL. It's a long one, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's mastodon.gamedev.place.
Yeah, gamedev.place or something.
Something
or
along those lines.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's still, you can still find everyone on Mastodon. So that's awesome.
I can have a very quick look. I have it here on the right. Yes, it's Bitbrain dev at mastodon.gamedev.place. Gamedev.place. Yeah.
Nice. Fantastic. Well, I'll also put those links in the description so that people can read up on those. And thank you so much for finding time to talk to me, Miguel.
Oh, always a pleasure. And I'm happy to come back. It's there are a lot of other things I would love with you to talk about.